No mai hoki mai ki ada fold, e mihi nei ko Duncan Greive tōku ingoa, joined by Glen Kyne for an emergency pod. How are you, Glenn?
Yeah, good. I mean, I was looking forward to an AGM today with NZME with some changes afoot, but lo and behold, there is new news.
It was already an exciting day for media in this country, but Stuff has very deliberately, and I think in a kind of unstuff-like way, just said, we're just going to drop a bomb in the middle of a competitor's big set piece. And, just really, really fascinating dynamic that's being set up here. So I'll just top line what happened, and then we'll just bang out what we think the most interesting elements of this are. I should say this is an emergency podcast. We're recording at 12:36 p.m. on June the 3rd. Later today, after this, I will go to the NZME AGM, and I'll bring a sort of second part to this to cover that meeting, and naturally that they will be talking about this too. But what just happened? So this morning about 10:30, Trade Me and Stuff simultaneously announced that Trade Me has taken a 50% stake in Stuff Digital Limited. Now, Stuff isn't currently in two different sort of structures underneath one umbrella. There's the mastheads, which is the Post, the Press, and all the other newspapers, plus a collection of different paywalled news sites. And then you have Stuff Digital Limited, which is largely Stuff, the website and the app, the sort of free-to-access part of the business, along with Neighbourly and some other digital properties. And as part of it, they're also announcing that the property part of Stuff Digital will be rebranded Trade Me Property, and they're going to figure the rest out over time. What was your sort of instinctive reaction to it, Glenn? This has been rumoured for a while, but now it's on.
So I think this is fantastic. Exciting news for a whole bunch of reasons that we'll get into. First thing I did, as I'm sure you did, was try to look what the investment number was. Of course, that's not disclosed.
Two private companies.
Private companies.
I mean, it may leak, but in all, there's also probably it's more likely that it will never be known.
Yeah, but interesting, given Sinead paid $1, 5 years ago, and I think today's the anniversary of the day from when Sinead made the management buyout deal with Channel 9. So also interesting timing and great timing. Amazing timing. So yeah, look, I looked at the purchase price. I think it's also interesting that the next thing I went to was who's going to control this company. And I think it's great that, Sinead, Stuff Digital team have retained operational control of Stuff Digital, which I think is a really important message for their audience, and maintained that via Sinead having effectively the deciding vote on a board that is split 50-50 between the two companies. So really, 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 really interesting. It's going to take a few months, obviously, for this deal to settle in full, but I think, while that's happening, time for them to plan what happens beyond just property in terms of how they integrate, Trade Me into Stuff and, use that Stuff audience to build value back for Trade Me.
Yeah, there's so much that's in this that it's kind of hard to know where to start, right? There's a narrative piece to it, which is sort of, so instructive and irresistible that it's almost on the nose, but that's that, Trade Me, the idea of Trade Me is fundamentally as a way of doing what used to be the newspaper's most lucrative business, which was the classifieds at the end of the newspaper, where you would buy, just regular kind of bric-a-brac, but also newspaper-inserted magazines like the Herald Holmes, now called One Roof, which we'll obviously get to. And, a lot of vehicles were traded through that, through the sort of back of the weekend paper in particular. And Trade Me disrupted that, became a very valuable business in its own right, was acquired by Stuff, or Stuff's predecessor in the mid-2000s for $750 million or thereabouts, was then on-sold for a considerable profit by Stuff's ultimate owners in Australia, and now is returning to buy 50% of the company that it both disrupted and previously had acquired it itself. It is kind of a near cinematic journey.
Oh, incredible! And the irony that I love is that the classifieds need the news product
right,
to be able to bolster their future. Like it's incredible 360.
Yeah. So I mean, and that is so. Like, let's talk about what the fundamental strategic thinking is behind it. So, Trade Me is a marketplace business. It both takes a percentage from sales, but also people pay to be on the platform, particularly in the property and automotive sectors. And it has advertising, has various other strains, but it's now an incredibly mature business with what I would assume to be incredibly stable kind of revenues, customers, all that kind of thing. It's also under attack from the likes of Facebook Marketplace in particular, which offers effectively a free version of its service. And so in its maturity and its vulnerability, it has sort of said, where can we get growth from? And irony upon ironies, they've looked at news and said, well, this is a huge audience, but an audience that struggles to sort of monetize itself through advertising. What if we buy a 50% stake in that huge audience, put our thread some of our brands and leverage the audience effectively and see if we can't make get growth out of that and get more data out of that. That's the thing that's probably most interesting to me and you is like, if you're a logged in Trade Me user, once this thing's properly wired up, the amount that Trade Me knows about its users in terms of where they live, the kinds of property they look at, the kinds of cars they've bought or looked at, the household items they bought, the picture they can build of a logged-in Trade Me user is quite extraordinary. To be able to take that and improve on the quality of the kind of advertising that is served through stuff when you're on that place where you spend a lot of time, where a huge audience goes every day. Is that the kind of the big trick, do you think, or is there something more again?
I think there's a couple of things. So what you're describing is that classic top of funnel. We've got 2 million plus unique users a month in the Stuff digital audience to pour into the top of that funnel day in, day out, starting with property, moving to automotive, and no doubt we'll see other categories open, which is going to be enormous for Trade Me to fill up the funnel in that way every day. And notwithstanding the fact that Trade Me already have I can't imagine a Kiwi out there that doesn't know the masthead Trade Me, right? So it's already has very, very, very strong recognition. But to build that engagement every day via Stuff is going to be absolutely incredible, I think, for Trade Me's performance. In the background, and I know we'll come back to this, with OneRoof demonstrating similar type benefits using the Herald homepage. And then on the other side of this, what's really interesting is if you think about Stuff's commercial ad revenue business, and they respond to briefs every day, all of a sudden opening that up to a much broader portfolio, including Trade Me, around certain customer types that sit inside those classified portfolios, it puts them in a very strong position because they can respond from an awareness point of view right through now to point of sale and closing the funnel. Quite incredible that they're able to do that. And it also opens up a question for me, close to my heart, is does this also enable a new financing model for the likes of The Block to come back to screens with obviously Stuff producing 3 News? Do Stuff and Trade Me look to come together to be able to provide a financing model to bring new targeted formats that fit, again, these classified portfolios back to screens?
It's a really great point that the sort of, because Trade Me, it's many things. It's, I think in people's minds, it's a place where you sell your sort of second-hand single bed that your kid's outgrown or something like that. But Trade Me is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, online retailer of new goods, not just from New Zealand, but also coming in internationally. So you think about what the sort of shrinking the gap between the audience and the ultimate purchase, like they having those things closer together is quite powerful. The thing that's probably that's really fascinating for me from a strategic sense is that you now have, I'm just sort of trying to guess at this, but in terms of a scaled new entrant making a big move into media in New Zealand and from New Zealand, I'm struggling to think of a time when a more valuable company will have moved into news, especially at a moment when news is probably at maybe at its historical low for the combined value of the sector. So you have a really, really powerful, well-capitalized, extremely good technology entrant coming into news, and they're right now they own 50% of Stuff Digital. It's hard to imagine that there isn't another part of the contract somewhere that says they have the right to acquire the other 50%, either for a specified fee or some kind of metric associated with whatever comes out of this. And you think about NZME this afternoon, in like less than 2 hours as we record this, they're going to have an AGM where they install a new board, and part of the thinking of the new board and announced thinking is we are going to contemplate spinning off, if you'll pardon the pun, our property portal into its own separate company. And they've already explored, with Gumtree, the idea of creating a car, an automotive version of OneRoof. So they're thinking about building a separate listed entity that would be separated from the news at the exact same time as a very large player in the same thing is buying into news. So these are literally opposite strategies, and both of them have a lot to of logic to underpin them.
Yeah, in some sense, I think it's the same strategy. I think there would have been a concern, and timing, right? We don't know exactly when these discussions all started, but certainly, I imagine NZME are a little bit concerned right now because they've just seen their future strategy where they saw a path they could go aggressively on their own with limited competition. All of a sudden, that competition just doubled and strengthened. And one of the key things here, Duncan, is when you run a company like NZME, and what is great, and I'll come back to why this is also great for the Stuff deal, but when you run a company like NZME, your core business is publishing the news every day, and you're trying to manage the cost and obviously all the pressures that we've talked about in that business. When you have a growth business, that requires investment in cash, and you struggle to give it that cash because the way OneRoof makes money is different from the way the Herald makes money. And when you're trying to allocate resource, it's really difficult to allocate resource in an equitable way. Freeing up OneRoof with its own future means that you can manage shareholder expectation. This is a growth business. We're going to drive for growth. Means we're going to put additional investment in, whereas we're going to manage the cost and still pay a dividend on the Herald and that core business and protect that. So very different. What you have, and I think it's absolutely the right strategy, right? Because you cannot disrupt and create a growth business from inside the core easily. It's very difficult to do. What you've got with Stuff and Trade Me is they've already decided they're not going to mess about with each other's businesses. They're just going to leverage the synergies that come from the audience and therefore the monetization both to both companies. So in some respects, I think they'll chase the same strategy, and I think it's now going to be incumbent on NZME to potentially accelerate their plans to either list or set up OneRoof as a separate entity to compete quickly.
Yeah, it's a great point. While they look different in that you have a marketplace swimming towards the news in one sense and a marketplace being pulled out of news in the other, what you have is them being functionally two very separate companies that can run their own strategies but leverage the sort of different assets that they each have. But I think the thing that's most impressive, taking the Stuff side of it for a moment, is that Stuff has, if you look at NZME versus Stuff, the sort of structural advantages that NZME's had. It's been a listed company versus Sinead owning the whole thing, having bought it for $1. It's also got the wraparound of this huge sort of radio-driven sales network, but also the radio properties going into it. So it's been this much larger thing. In some ways, this tie-up, even though Stuff is going to be the junior partner, at least on a value basis, in terms of the number of employees, they're probably fairly similar, I would think, in terms of Trade Me versus Stuff. The Stuff Digital would probably be smaller, but that structural advantage that NZME has possessed for quite a while now over Stuff, from some angles vanishes, and there'll be certain domains that Trade Me, that Stuff Digital now has an advantage over the NZME properties in, which just hasn't been the case for a while.
I think you're spot on. I mean, if you think about the future of a digital publisher in particular, and its ability to innovate, be it classified or be it other areas, it's going to be who can build the greater IP and pathway and technology the fastest. That's going to evolve artificial intelligence. Trade Me was built, it is a technology company at its heart. You talked about its ability to understand its audience. That's a huge advantage for Stuff moving into the future about how they think about developing the Stuff Digital product. I think it's, I just think this is so exciting, Duncan, because it's strengthening competition in both the classified and the news area. And importantly, as you touched on, we've brought a new investment model, ownership model into news media that potentially opens the door for others, right, to think about how do they use traditional media to build their own companies. Really interesting.
I think that's one of the most kind of, it's unknown at this point. This is a theory that will be tested against reality over the coming months and years. But if Trade Me can prove that if you can take the raw audience that is news, and we know that there are business models to wrap around news, most notably subscriptions and paywalls. But if you can prove that there are other adjacent businesses that can be, that effectively replicate what the old model of the newspaper was, where the classifieds helped cross-subsidize and create an incentive for great journalism up the front of the paper. If you can replicate that in a digital environment, news, which has been taking such a hammering for so long in terms of its the fundamental viability of it, particularly as a free-to-access product, if they're right about this, that's a massive epochal change in the sort of way that you can think about investing in news as an organization. So much to be proven, so many ways this can go wrong. We should probably get to kind of the challenges it has, because they're not inconsiderable. But if you look at it from a glass half full perspective and what the upside is, it's pretty spectacular.
Oh, it's great. It's exciting. And you are going to be a fly on the wall at the NZME AGM, but I imagine there'll be, now that largely the board issue and share issue are resolved, I imagine there will be a lot of questioning now around the One Roof strategy, given the news from Stuff today.
Yeah, I think it's a real PR timing masterstroke from Stuff and Trade Me to just, on what was going to be NZME's day, quite a set piece, quite a managed situation now compared to the chaos it looked like it might be a few months ago. Now, the whole, everyone is digesting this, and everyone will be asking, how does this impact, the future of the business? I haven't looked at what it's done to the share price, if anything. Typically in the New Zealand market, fairly tightly held companies at times, you don't necessarily see the immediate impact of it, but it's really, really just a fascinating thing to happen on this day of all days.
It also made me wonder around the future, because now that Trade Me are private equity owned, it did make me wonder around whether or not there is an exit event for that private equity owner on the back of this deal in the future by again listing Trade Me once, as we talked about, should this deal provide, or, prove to be fruitful and build meaningful growth for Trade Me.
Yeah, from what I've read, and I'm by no means an expert in this area, that the owners or the private equity owners of Trade Me, they've owned it a while longer than they might have thought to. They have probably taken more profits out than potentially is sort of typical, and that they, that this move probably keeps them in it for a bit longer, but potentially if they can start to show growth that had been getting harder to come by, it opens up the ability for them to take a considerable profit there. So absolutely, the ownership of Trade Me becomes very much in play there as well. Let's talk about some of the sort of smaller issues that are nonetheless quite interesting with it. You're going to have a company now, which you've got like journalists who are pretty poorly paid in the scheme of New Zealand kind of entities, again in this functionally sharing space with sharing some shareholding with technology workers who are much more highly paid. You've got, when Sinead first announced the sort of Trade Me acquisition, there was this idea that there would be a sort of a shareholding and a some kind of element of it ring fenced for staff's employees. You do hear persistently from staff workers are sort of that hasn't been made flesh. Now there's an opportunity for it actually to be kind of for it to appear in the aftermath. I don't want to make any assumptions there. There's just once you get through the elation of this moment, and I have a friend who works at Trade Me who says that there's huge amounts of excitement there. So this isn't something that is viewed as a challenge from that side, but rather than that, actually it's much more an exciting opportunity for them. But you've got a unionized staff workforce that is negotiating its deal there, that it will be looking now at, rather than it being like a single owner, it's now got this very well capitalized company off to the side. All of these things are complexities that will have to be digested by the new company.
Yeah, I think first of all, I just see enormous positive in this ownership change. We're not seeing any loss of jobs. We're seeing everyone maintain their roles. I think that's hugely positive given the news we've been talking about for the last couple of years. So that's great. That's true. I also think, Duncan, that because this deal isn't going to close for a few months, and these timelines are always a little fluid, 3 to 6 months probably, but they've got time to work through, what does the new incentive look like for staff employees? How do they bring balance between these issues will be front and centre for a working committee, no doubt put together by the two companies of, HR personnel and key leaders. They'll be working through these things, and they've got the benefit of a little bit of time to figure it out. And, the issue you raise around the staff feeling some reward and equity for this transaction, I've got no doubt will be solved and high on the priority list. And, Sinead mentioned in her comments that she already felt there was a strong cultural alignment between the two companies. I think that's arguably the biggest thing. So often when you see these types of transactions fail, it's because the cultures are so vastly different they can't be brought together. It's a huge head start if they've already got a meeting of the minds culturally, and you can
see it, right? Trade Me was born and is still headquartered in Wellington. Stuff Digital was born and conceived of at a fairly similar time, and internet moment down there. Obviously, a lot of differences underneath that, but that alone kind of gives you some degree of alignment there.
I think there'll be challenges around, at a basic level, from a sales point of view, out in the market, 2 sales teams, who owns the customer, how they're going to figure those types of issues out. But again, can all be solved. And I think some of the bigger, I guess, opportunities that they think about is who takes the lead on them. Will it be Stuff? Will it be the TradeMe team?
Yeah, in some ways you can sort of make an argument for, over time, them developing a combined muscle to exploit the commercial opportunities that maybe it might make more sense to sit in an explicitly commercial vehicle like TradeMe. But you look across the verticals there that outside of the sort of hard news areas, places like lifestyle, which, there are, where you have kind of beauty or fashion reporting, you can now over time start to tie that into different verticals within TradeMe. It's not, it starts with property. It's the most obvious one, the highest value, but there's plenty more to kind of work through besides. And equally, as you made reference to earlier, once you've got the whole thing properly wired up, the commercial proposition, it's just not like what else is out there on the market. So for agencies which might previously have had a bit of a bias towards other platforms, they'll be looking at this with quite a different set of eyes, you would think.
Yeah, and I think the advertisers increasingly want to see the collection of data to prove out their theory on any particular campaign, and TradeMe are going to have a real strength in that area. Stuff are going to have a real strength in creative execution. I think that will require bringing 2 teams together to form a more unified approach in market into the future to deliver on those advertisers. But man, what a combination. It's a killer combination in that brand agency world. It really, really is. Another question I've got is, obviously Sinead is going to be the chair of the joint company. I wonder whether or not we see the appointment of a new CEO. Obviously, with Laura leaving a little while ago, it all sort of makes it a bit clearer now why Sinead didn't appoint an interim CEO and she took that role herself. But I do wonder now whether we'll see an appointment in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this is going to be a big body of work, and, for Sinead to take on, it's quite a big shift to sign up for. The other part of this is that there was reporting, earlier this year that the other part of Stuff, which is mastheads, were in discussions with NZME for a few months there about potentially the sale of some or all of those of mastheads to NZME, which were broken off when the sort of Grennan board coup became public on the NZME side. And the stated reason was that there wasn't a cultural values alignment there. Now, we are about to see today a new board installed at NZME, which is different, but it's not as kind of hostile as it looked at various times. There wasn't a wholesale kind of replacement of the board. It's a couple of new members and a new chair. So is there a possibility for, once that is kind of digested, for mastheads to be sort of sold to NZME still? Or does the fact that now Stuff Digital is much more obviously a competitor to elements of what the Herald's trying to accomplish, does that sort of make that route a bit less palatable to NZME? Like there are so many sort of second order questions that flow out of this.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes out of ultimately what is Sinead's desire. How long does she want to stay as an owner-operator in that masthead business? She said today that she wasn't looking to reopen discussions with the NZME, but as you quite rightly point out, with a new board, they may see interest and may have a desire to try and reopen those conversations. I still think that the ODT is a potential option in that masthead business. Should Sinead be interested in actually pursuing, either bringing in an investment or an outright sale, I still think they're a very viable option.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think we should leave it there, but this is all very much a sort of first take reaction to it. There'll no doubt be more information to come, and and likely some of that will come out of the NZME AGM this afternoon. I'll be talking with my colleague Anna Rafiti Connell about that later on today. Thank you, Glenn, so much for jumping on this, and Tia here for leaping into the studio to record. Fascinating times.
Thanks, Duncan. Talk soon.
Mm-hmm.